Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the Nintendo Switch Lite and see how it holds up in 2021. Now what I can tell you is, first of all, this device is a very perplexing device overall because first of all, it is definitely still worth it. I'm not going to say this device isn't worth it at all because it's still completely worth it 100%. But the main thing to keep in mind is that not everyone can access it easily. It's kind of like a hard device to pick up for the most part. And I think that's the biggest problem with it. But if you can get your hands on it, for sure this device is worth it. But I will tell you, there have been some changes in the gaming atmosphere since this device's launch, and even from my video last year, mostly with the release of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S. We have been seeing some reports of, Nintendo not making a newer console anytime soon based on what we're seeing. So that kind of makes the Switch Lite worth it a little bit more. And I'll probably get into that later on in this video. If you want to pick up a Nintendo Switch Lite, I'll find the cheapest one on Amazon or wherever they're supported, wherever you can get one at. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now the front of the Nintendo Switch Lite it still maintains that 5.5-inch LCD panel. It's 720p and it really hasn't changed too much, with my specific panel. It's still the same, a couple of scratches here and there, but for the most part, it's really not an area where I kind of see myself complaining about. Like, it's a very, I understand what Nintendo was trying to do with this panel. It wasn't really supposed to be a, replacement of the Nintendo Switch or a Wii U panel or something. It's just supposed to be like, a cheaper model, but it still maintains the same resolution, which I think this panel and the Switch panels are almost identically the same. But funny enough, because it's a little bit smaller, it kind of makes it seem like it's a sharper panel, which is just so funny to me. Now you still have the standard joysticks to the side, the D-pad and the buttons and everything. One of the bigger problems that we still see with these Switches is that the joysticks just end up getting some drift. They end up not working properly, and that is still a major problem in 2021. I have been seeing on some Nintendo reports that if you go ahead and actually contact Nintendo, you can actually get it shipped to them for free and they'll fix it and send it back. So that's probably the number one thing I would recommend people doing. And if more people do that over time, Nintendo will understand their problems and they'll probably end up just coming up with some brand new design for joysticks or something, because PlayStation's had the same problem. Xbox controllers have the same problem too. Who knows what the issue can be, but by contacting Nintendo and getting them to fix it, that's a major thing you can do in order to have Nintendo fix it in general. Now you still have the USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is something I love seeing. And on the back, pretty much standard setup. You have your micro SD card slot, your game card, setup you can insert and everything. But for the most part, it's a pretty stock console and it's very minimalistic in a way too. And to be honest, whenever I hold my Nintendo Switch Lite, I actually kind of like the way it feels. I kind of like it a little bit more than my standard Switch. Another thing that I love about my Nintendo Switch Lite still in 2021, even more so than my standard Nintendo Switch, is that when I'm traveling somewhere, which is not really that often, but if I'm driving somewhere and I bring my Switch Lite with me and I throw it in my book bag or something, or even when I'm playing the games in my hands, for some reason the Joy-Cons on my standard Switch just end up sliding off all the time. And if I'm like getting deep into a game, or if I'm just kind of even just swinging it around my hands a little bit, kind of just like to pass the time, for some reason the joysticks always just get in, they always get detached and it's just kind of a messy process and they go flying all over the place. And it happened with my old Joy-Cons, it happened with these Joy-Cons. I've seen it kind of talked about here and there on some subreddits as well, and it's just kind of an annoyance. With the Nintendo Switch Lite, whether it's a Pro or a Con, you can't really replace these Joy-Cons easily because you have to take it apart in order to do that. But that's kind of a pro because you end up having everything right there and you don't have to disconnect anything. Now it is kind of an annoyance because you can't really do a bunch of multiplayer games easily unless you get the Joy-Con separately and take them with you, and you can't really dock it up to a TV, which is another annoyance process. But I honestly think it's kind of a pro as well, which is kind of funny to say. So in terms of that, in terms of the outside and everything, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, I want to mention the modding capability and everything like that too. Still, there has not been a, universally wide mod for the Switch Lites, at least for the versions that I'm on. I know with the Nintendo Switch, my regular model, I was able to modify that, but this one, you're still not able to do that. I've not heard of any news for anything, changing there. So that's probably another big thing to keep in mind. But if you're not wanting to to mod it or whatever, then it's not really that big of a deal. But the change that I mentioned early on in this video was that, with the PlayStation 5 and Xboxes coming out, we were apparently going to see Nintendo possibly making another console as well. But from reports that we've seen, there's not any news on any, new Switch Lite or new Nintendo Switch models. There could potentially be, a Nintendo Switch Pro, but no immediate successor to the Switch or Switch Lite. And what this means is that these Switch and Switch Lites are still going to be probably for sale for the time being. But on top of that, the games that are being developed for these specific consoles are still going to be maintained. And it's not like they're going to be, out of date anytime soon. It's not like if you pick up the Nintendo Switch Lite now, you're going to be out of date of a console, next year because the successor's coming out. That doesn't seem to be the case. Since the Switch came out, many years after the initial PlayStation 4 came out, we can only see that, I imagine, another 3 years or so before we even see the next, Nintendo Switch 2 come out. So if that ends up being the case, then that's great, but it's also bad because we're not going to see another Nintendo Switch console. But that's also good because if you currently own the Nintendo Switch Lite, even now in 2021, it's not like the Nintendo Switch, the next one, is around the corner. And based on the reports that we're seeing, that still isn't the case. So that's another big advantage for the Switch Lite. Even though it's been out for almost 2 years now, it's almost like a year and a half, you're not really out of date of this console, which is a really good thing in my opinion. So that is one asset of it. But the other thing is that a ton of games are still being released for this console. And it's like every single month we're getting new and new games. And this is something that's really awesome. The free game library also is getting a little bit better. It honestly needs a little bit of a development in my opinion. But I honestly think the fact of the matter is that this console, getting those new games and everything every month and every couple months, those are some really big assets for sure. And it does seem like Nintendo really cares about that, obviously, because this is their main console and they're trying to get these consoles in as many people's hands as possible. They're increasing production. It's still being like one of the best sold consoles every single month for the time being. And I think in some months even outsold the PlayStation 5s and Xboxes. So even though it's still kind of hard to pick up, a lot of these things are still being available in a lot of places. So that's another pretty big advantage of the Nintendo Switch Lite. But again, not everything is perfect about this console. The Nintendo Switch Lite, as I mentioned before, its main demise, its main problem is the fact that you can't really dock it up to a specific TV. You can't really dock it up to, those type of things. And I think it is kind of a problem because, if you're trying to play games, then connect them to the TV, Nintendo Switch is a much more versatile console because it can be an at-home and, on-the-go console. The Switch Lite is really just a portable console. It's kind of just like a Nintendo DS. You can't really do anything outside of just, plugging it in. You can't really do anything outside of, a portable console experience. And that's why I would almost always recommend people, if they have the opportunity to and if they have the availability to pick up a Nintendo Switch, the standard model. That is going to be giving you a much better experience overall, and it's going to be giving you much better functionality, in my opinion. You're going to be able to dock it up. You're going to be able to easily change up the Joy-Cons, and, it's just a much better experience from what I've seen. But as I've mentioned before, there are still some pros with the Switch Lite. I think one of the main ones is, like I mentioned before, the portability in the hands. It's a smaller console, so it's easier to bring with you, and the joysticks just don't, and the Joy-Cons just don't get in the way, and they don't detach or anything like that. But on top of that, another big thing, the battery life is better on the Switch Lite from what I've seen. So that's another pretty big advantage. If you want to pick up the Switch Lite, you're going to be able to get longer lasting gameplay from what I've seen in my experience. Now, I have seen a couple of conflicting things, but I think the main thing is that because the, Nintendo Switch Lite isn't really having to go and charge up consoles and the Joy-Cons at the same time, it can really just depend on the console instead of having to charge up the batteries within the Joy-Cons themselves. So I think that's one major thing. Also, the battery size is pretty respectable for this type of console and the display and everything. So I think overall, the console experience from the Switch Lite in 2021 is a thumbs up. I think it's a great console for sure. It's definitely not perfect. There are some cons like I mentioned, but if you have the opportunity to, I would say go for it. It's a beautiful console for sure, and it gets a thumbs up for me on my books. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.